So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yishmael the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste from many centuries. As we read it in Yishmael, as always, is a very important basis of understanding the prophecies of the time of the end. Combination then with Daniel the prophet and Ezekiel, Yirmiyahu, and also Zechariah, we have at least a very important basis, so then we are not found ourselves lacking in knowledge. But let's try then to understand what's going on as far as the world and decipher what are the wishes of nations versus the holy schedule. So for us then become wiser and then understand the holy instructions, and the holy instructions are always the best. Liking it or not, during this time of the restoration period, we are then doing as per the instructions. And reading from Daniel the 11th chapter, where can we find the absolute proof regarding then the unification of the Soviet Union? As we understand, the leaders of the states or the countries, they're used to united, making then the Soviet Union. They are then united once again. There are a few problems they must work through until they become a force once again to be reckoned with, and the understanding and objective is protecting the trade of the new system. This new partnership, the Soviet Union, is not the same as the objectives first wished many years ago. The agenda has changed. The objective is much more important at this time because it involves then the new trade system and the protection thereof. The force and tenacity of the Soviets are truly back. So let's find on the instructions where they are at very precisely. Daniel, the 11th chapter, verse 1-4. Then they shall come in later times with a great army and much equipment. Speaking of the kingdom of the north. The kingdom of the north is the Soviet Union. The kingdom of the south is then Africa. And kingdom of the east is China. These are the main players. Speaking of the kingdom of the south, there are a couple of components. Firstly, you find then the raw materials and important rare metals found in Congo, the place where then the prophet Yishmael mentioned the violent ones beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Then you find the northern part of Africa, or the northbound area of the southern kingdom, where Egypt plays then a very important role. But let's understand why the Soviet Union must return and become once again a stronger force than prior. Let's then make another reading as far as this chapter. Then you find in the previous verse, in the kingdom of the north, and shalt raise a greater host than the former. Explaining of the kingdom of the north, explaining of the Soviet Union. Why this is then very important? Because we find precisely then what it states, then those who came from the ramification of an existing system. That's the reason why China is then socialist, because they are obviously teaching the world on how to do trade. For 1,000 years, unfortunately, the West did not do a great job. There were some instances where there were obviously times of prosperity, but those are very few. When we read this situation then, what can we read as far as the kingdom of the north? Let's try then to break this situation apart so then we can understand what's going on. Firstly, let's evaluate what Daniel the prophet is pointing at. If we were talking of tabernacling, then we would understand this on the land of Cush. Prophet Yishmael was the most prominent prophet of the entire Israel. During his time, he had the word of the Creator himself, and he spoke the words of heaven. When we understand Daniel does not speak in this particular chapter regarding tabernacling, but he does make a reference of a covenant. Where do we find covenant? Very importantly, you find it in the 23rd verse of the 11th chapter of Daniel. You'll find it then the covenant. Then later on he makes another point regarding the covenant. When we understand Daniel for what it is, he's speaking until he reaches covenant. He's explaining of the time of the Gentiles. Understandably, Gentiles do not have an understanding of tabernacling. Daniel was working for a pagan king, though he himself, Daniel, was not a pagan. But he was receiving understandings from heaven, so then the Gentiles later on would be guided. So when we read the content of the entire chapter 11 until it reaches the point of covenant, mostly of this understanding, except the establishment of the vision, it is purely Gentile related. The kingdom of the north obviously speaks of the Soviet Union. The kingdom of the south refers to Africa. The kingdom of the east refers to China. These are the main players. As we read then the situation with Egypt, it is the utmost importance for the Soviet Union or Mr. Putin to provide then arms as much as he can and deliver them to Egypt. So Egypt can do its work and stabilize the region of northern Africa. So this area is then secured from the very strong situation going on with ISIL. Those are the sons of Yishmael, and they are very serious regarding their position as a state. Sometimes when we read the Quran and we watch these people over there, sometimes you have a few doubts regarding them. But they are not playing around. They want the establishment of the Islamic State, and obviously the Quran must be used. However, we must understand there is another point of this situation. We should have temperance, balance. And Egypt is in the very center of this time and period where then the ISIL must then make a quick adjustment of what they believe and what they are doing there, because they must receive the second transition, where then in a gradual understanding, as then the nations, the Arab nations in Egypt, they join themselves together as they were for thousands of years ago, and then providing fuel for the freighters of this earth, so then the words of the Quran can be exercised. Hospitality, helping one another, and nations rebuilding themselves from years and centuries of war. Until we reach this point, Egypt must receive arms. They must stabilize northern Africa, so then later other skirmishes then takes place. But then Egypt will be set and trained for it. And as we read from the Holy Instructions, at the end, at later verses prior of coming to the covenant, then we know these nations shall be victorious. As far as the Soviet Union, there is no doubt whatsoever when we read 11th chapter and verse 1-4. And at later times they shall come with a great army and much equipment. The equipment explains of equipment of war. And the Soviet Union must become the most prominent arms country of this world. It doesn't mean the other countries won't build arms. It's not the point. But as far as quantity, quality, the Soviet Union must become the top. And sometimes leaders, they are afraid, they are concerned because of the existing situation, can be sure of it. As we do and obey the holy instructions, the other areas, they come to place very easily. Reading from the holy instructions gives us then another viewpoint of the whole situation, explaining then later on forces coming from Congo. As we understand, there is another transition coming, and quite honestly, China has not yet is truly 100% involved in the first transition. So we are then in the starting point of the first transition yet. China must lead the entire world as far as the new trade system. And it is coming very fast. Yesterday I was reading a very special article from one of the Asiatic newspapers, and there is another point extremely important regarding then the icon of lending money. There are institutions in China that then a person decided to have some sort of a firm or some sort of trade of his or her own. China can lend money via online. So then not only you have the purchasing power, you have to send and receive money, you can invest at the same time, then you can receive money lended from someplace else, mostly China. However, there was also an article, they were concerned with defaults. But these truly can be easily straightened out, because simply when China has, obviously China have this money on hand, when they do give this money away, of course they lend the money, they should only be used this money so then they can invest on products. And then the person receiving the lended money can simply wait until the yielding of those portions that were invested. Then they can receive, and then they can pay back the percentage that China requires, and then use the rest of it for their own investments. So the whole situation as far as balancing the entire works is having the center point of investment directly on products. As a person clicks on a product, person likes it and projects in the future, the number of these items are going to be sold, then they can project, invest on those, and the company behind the product receive these investment money on the other side, and then properly invest so they can produce more. Doing this way won't ever have any defaults, because the whole works is held by the time that a month cycle completes. when they receive their earnings, that they can use it. Now, if they do this 1,000 times with so many products, at the end of the month you can be sure of it, you have a very nice check. But going forward with the system, let's then understand the movements of these armies, because later on we have then the establishment of the vision. And it's not very far away. The establishment of the vision is the holy city on the land of Cush, as precisely as Prophet Yishmael prophesied centuries ago. As we read these understandings then, you find they are very true. And the most important point at this time and place is understanding the importance of linking up every nation with China. It is absolutely crucial. United States is trying to extend itself once again, and they are in the midst of many war fronts, very expensive wars, and they are not counting the cost. And we understand why they are doing this. At the same time they are involved with so many wars, they are printing money like a festival. But then when the time comes that the money printing stops, then they are going to get their money from the exchange. Then those nations dependent upon the USD, such as Brazil for instance, 100% dependent, those nations will pay the cost. The only reason why the situation is not dire at the moment is because they are printing money every day. They are printing. So when you print money, you have then the values in your hand. But then when they halt printing, then they have to get the money from someplace else. The United States does not have a very strong investment system. So the best way for the nation of Brazil at the moment is maintaining the existing government. Why then they should do this? This new center-right government trying to get a hold of the government via the elections on 26th of this month, they want to join the United States once again and be slaves by the USD, and doing trade then with the European Union stagnated. China is saving the European Union. They don't like to observe the situation as this, but China is truly saving them, liking it or not. The other point is, if United States wants another push, China only has to stop exporting to the United States, and the United States simply halts at once. So let's evaluate the situation very cautiously, because it was said before many times, during the time of the restoration period, where we are then on the schedule of the holy instructions, we should be concerned of what not to do. The best for Brazil is maintaining the existing government. China has lots of investment money in this country yet, but they are holding back because of these so many skirmishes going on. It is very easily for this existing government then to do some reform, and then obviously doing trade with China even more, preparing this country, as then the Vice President went over there in China last year in November and brought to Brazil lots of Chinese money, many times 12 digits, so then we can start doing trade directly with China. This new candidate, he wants a direct relationship with the United States. It's going to be absolutely disastrous, because the United States has no longer economy. If China stops export into the United States simply halts. The United States has to stop. So the United States, they don't have enough materials, they don't have enough money, they don't have enough people to do the work, and they have nearly no industry anymore. So then, placing ourselves in an old type of system, it won't help us. Because the United States is trying to extend once again the 1,000 years of deceit, as then the king of Babylon tried to do in the 3rd chapter of Daniel. They tried to build themselves a statue of gold from a time where it doesn't belong. As we read then, Daniel the prophet gives us very strong understandings of China, and then linking up China with Middle Eastern countries. You can be sure of it. China must be linked with Egypt. China must be linked with Libya. China must be linked with Liberia. China must be linked with the nations of the Arab world, Saudi Arabia. And China must be linked with every nation in this planet. So they can understand then the enormity of the situation. So then, now that we have a revelation from this new candidate for the Brazilian presidency, he didn't reveal himself until yesterday. And for some reason he went to the candidacy, the debate on television, and he had no plan of his own. Amazingly, there was another candidate that questioned him as far as what is your plan. He had no idea. Now he's the second candidate for the prime position, and he revealed then his plans yesterday. And his plan is not very wise. He wants to join up with the United States in extending the 1,000 years of deceit. He wants to become then partners with the European Union, trying once again to extend the 1,000 years of deceit, and both of them won't work. So best is maintaining this existing government. They have their faults, their problems, but it's much easier maintaining these and making friendships with China once again, and then providing resources for infrastructure, the ports and airports and roads and railroads, and pushing for even the Dragon Mart in South America, for instance, becoming a distribution center of the South Atlantic. So then, these points are very true, and we can read once again in the Holy Instructions in chapter 11 of Daniel. The Soviet Union must return. Should give our best regards then to Mr. Gorbachev. He's in a hospital, but he's recuperating, obviously. He's going to watch then his own country becoming once again the Soviet Union. And then as we, in quote, march forward, we are expecting more news from China, because China has saved Germany, and China is going to save then Italy. Italy is also absolutely waiting for the Prime Minister of China to go over there and take care of their problems. The Italian government is bankrupt. The Vatican is bankrupt. The whole works is bankrupt. The whole Europe is bankrupt. The whole system they tried to gather together and they would not adhere to each other is very obvious. As we expect more news from China, let's then give a bit of a glimpse of the covenant. Then comes the joining of China with Israel. But we're going to verify these more later, so please stay tuned. Much more coming up.